What if we never started hunting whales? Imagine a world in which the relentless pursuit of whales never swept across the oceans. Picture our seas undisturbed by the thunderous explosions of harpoon cannons, unmarked by the decades of industrial whaling that claimed hundreds of thousands of the ocean's largest creatures. To answer what might have been if humanity never hunted whales is not just to speculate about the animals themselves, but to unravel centuries of global industry, economic growth, cultural traditions, and cascading ecological impact. Whaling shaped human history in ways that might seem surprising. It illuminated cities, oiled machinery, inspired art and literature, and fueled global trade. The history of whaling is inseparable from the history of industrialization, exploration, and international commerce. By turning away from whales, the world would have unfolded differently on every continent and across every ocean. First and foremost, the great whales, blue whales, bowheads, right whales, sperm whales, and others, would have remained at the centers of their marine ecosystems, powerful forces in the deep. These ocean giants, left undisturbed in enormous numbers, would have continued to fertilize the seas, their nutrient-rich waste feeding plankton blooms that, in turn, sustain the smallest fish up to the mightiest predators. The ocean's biological pumps, driven in part by whales, would have moved carbon from the surface to the deep with even greater efficiency than today. If whaling had never been practiced, whale populations might today resemble their pre-industrial abundance. Imagine blue whales by the tens of thousands, their rumbling songs undisturbed, their bodies sweeping through ocean currents from the polar seas to equatorial waters. Humpbacks might still gather in vast schools, their synchronized breaches and feeding displays legendary among sailors, naturalists, and children alike. Sperm whales, the largest brain on Earth unhunted, might dominate the world's imagination as mysterious architects of deep-sea realms. A world without whaling would have fundamentally different ecosystems under the waves. Whales play a pivotal role in distributing nutrients vertically and horizontally through the fin, water column. When they feed deep and release waste at the surface, they bring nutrients up, stimulating plankton growth, the very base of the oceanic food chain. Plankton, in turn, sequesters carbon dioxide from the atmosphere, mitigating climate change. With abundant whales, it's possible our climate today would be, if ever so slightly, cooler. The additional carbon drawn down by the thriving plankton blooms might mean slightly lower levels of greenhouse gases and slightly more stable oceanic carbon cycles. The fate of polar seas would be especially notable. With thriving right whales and bowhead whales feeding among the ice, the Arctic and Antarctic ecosystems might be even richer, brimming with life. Krill and small fish populations, checked by healthy whale numbers, could have remained in balance, preventing unpredictable population booms and crashes that ripple through food webs. The absence of mass whaling would also sharply alter the fates of other marine creatures, often ensnared by whaling's broad net. Albatrosses and other seabirds would find plenty of sustenance among the rich leftovers from whale feeding. The complex web of sharks, fish, squid, and smaller cetaceans would be more robust, less stressed by the removal of top-tier predators and ecosystem engineers. But the absence of whaling would have shaped the human world just as profoundly. Whalebone corsets, whale oil lamps, the commerce of ambergris and spermaceti, the whaling stations that studded North Atlantic, South Pacific, and Antarctic shores, all absent, all replaced by something else. Consider the bustling port towns that arose to outfit and service whaling fleets: New Bedford, Nantucket, Stavanger, Nagasaki, Tromsø. Without the wealthy return of whale oil and baleen, many coastal towns would simply never have flourished. Some might have withered, their populations moving inland or seeking other trades. The grand wooden ships, the generations of shipwrights, rope makers, and sail weavers who owed their livelihoods to whaling, all would have turned their skills elsewhere. But necessity is the mother of invention, and humanity is ever resourceful. The demand for light, lubrication, and a host of other whale-derived goods would not have disappeared just because whales remained untouched. Instead, other fuels and materials would have replaced whale oil in the flickering lamps of London, New York, and Paris. Coal would, perhaps, have been turned to even more rapidly, ushering in earlier and more intensive fossil fuel use. Vegetable oils, like rapeseed or olive oil, might have dominated lighting and industrial lubrication for decades longer before the rise of kerosene and petroleum. In places like Japan, where culture and sustenance were intimately tied to whales, new culinary and cultural traditions might have emerged, focused on alternative marine life or even on new forms of agriculture. This shift might have small but intriguing effects on the global energy economy. Whale oil's dominance in the 18th and early 19th century provided an important stepping stone between traditional light sources, like tallow, rendered from animal fat, and candles, and the wide adoption of kerosene. Without whale oil, the incentive to innovate alternative lighting fuels would have accelerated. Perhaps petroleum drilling would begin decades earlier as the pressure to find a substitute for whale oil pushed chemists and entrepreneurs to develop new extraction and refining technologies. The environmental implications are ambiguous. Less whale hunting, more early coal and oil extraction. The world might have experienced similar or even greater levels of air pollution and greenhouse gas emissions exchanged for the thriving presence of whales. Whaling's absence would ripple through art and literature. The very metaphors and imagery that permeate classics like Herman Melville's Moby Dick would be fundamentally altered. The absence of whale-inspired myths and cautionary tales might leave a hole in the collective imagination, substituted by other symbols of nature's vastness and inscrutability, perhaps the ocean itself, or other, equally enigmatic creatures like giant squids or deep-water sharks. International conflicts and exploration might have shifted course as well. Whaling was among the first truly global industries, with ships ranging from the icy Antarctic seas to the balmy tropics in search of ever-dwindling prizes. In their wake, whaling fleets mapped uncharted lands, established trade networks, and brought with them merchants, missionaries, and occasionally new diseases. Islands like South Georgia, the Azores, and the Faroe Islands owe much of their history to passing or settling whalers. Without this mobile and sometimes ruthless workforce, the spread of Western influence might have been slower or focused differently. Some remote islands might have remained uncolonized for longer, escaping the early tide of globalization. On the other hand, the relationships between indigenous communities and the ocean would be more uninterrupted. In many Arctic and Pacific societies, whaling was not just an economic pursuit, but a sacred tradition intertwined with ancestry, survival, and spirituality. Without the intrusion of foreign whaling fleets, these communities would have had more years, perhaps centuries, of uninterrupted tradition and stronger populations of whales to sustain them. The tension between traditional, sustainable hunting and the voracious, profit-driven slaughter of industrialized societies would never have arisen. In the absence of mass whaling, the need for marine conservation might have arrived under different banners. In our timeline, the shock of nearly losing entire species of whales impelled nations to work together to regulate and eventually ban commercial hunting. This collaboration set precedents for global oceanic protections and marine mammal science. Without the peril faced by the whales, the movement for ocean conservation might have arisen more slowly, perhaps focusing instead on fisheries, pollution, or coral reef damage. The equation of natural resource management and international cooperation would still be solved, but by other, more complex problems. Some marine species would still have faced overexploitation: cod, salmon, tuna, and other fish. But the ocean's greatest sentinels would still inspire awe, roaming the world's oceans with little fear of humanity. The biological legacy is perhaps the most profound. With whale populations maintained at or near their ecological carrying capacity, the world's oceans would be more alive. The whale's role in cycling nutrients would continue on a grand scale, possibly supporting even greater abundance of fish and other marine life, providing an oceanic fertilizer that keeps entire seas more productive and resilient. The collapse of whale-based ecosystems, an overlooked tragedy of the 20th century, would never have occurred. Sea life at every level would thrive, confronting only new challenges brought on by other human activities: pollution, shipping, and climate change, but with the backbone of the food web, the giant whales, intact. The absence of whaling's devastation would also have shaped the emotional relationship between humans and whales. In today's world, much of the reverence and protection given to whales is reactionary, born from the sorrow and horror of recognizing how close we came to eradicating these magnificent beings. The modern whale-watching industry exists almost as an apology for their wanton destruction. In a world where whales have always been plentiful, opportunities for wonder and connection would be vastly multiplied. Every coastal child might see a breaching humpback or a pod of orcas from the shore. Every sailor might swap stories of the great blue giants encountered on a crossing. The mystery and majesty of the whale would be omnipresent in coastal folklore and daily life, not just in conservation literature and environmental campaigns. Whale tourism as we know it might be even grander. Imagine seeing hundreds of whales on a single voyage, their populations undimmed, their songs resonating through the salt water with unbroken lineage. These immense gatherings would inspire, educate, and perhaps instill a greater sense of planetary stewardship, turning the oceans into living classrooms of natural wonder. Our relationship with whales, free from the stain of near genocide, might be closer to that of reverence rather than repentance. Whales would not be symbols of loss, but of abundance, living proof that the sea can sustain and delight, given respect and restraint. Their intelligence, sociality, and communication would be better studied, simply because large, unbroken populations would offer more chances to observe complex behavior. Legendary individuals, matriarchs spanning generations, and unique pods and their cultures might be mapped and understood, connecting all of humanity more closely to the tapestry of marine life. Yet, the world would not be uncritically better for every living thing. The substitution for whaling, in terms of energy and resource extraction, might have resulted in greater harm elsewhere. The forests of North America and Europe might have been logged more intensively for fuelwood, coal mining might have expanded at an accelerated rate, or animal fat candles, and the livestock farming that produced them, might have proliferated. Each substitute would bring its own set of ecological costs. Similarly, certain human communities would have had fewer avenues for prosperity or cultural expression. Great fortunes, like those made by New England whaling families, would never have existed. The cultural and literary echoes of lives spent hunting whales, the melancholic nostalgia of former whaling ports, would be replaced by different narratives of seafaring and survival. But on the grand scale, the absence of whaling likely means a richer, more robust ocean environment, with vital feedback effects on climate, biodiversity, and human experience itself. Whales, never driven to the brink, carry on their ancient migration routes. Oceans, kept in balance by their feeding and movement, provide more productivity, buffering humanity against changing times. The stories sung among seafarers and villagers are less of miraculous, rare encounters, and more of the everyday majesty of living among giants. And perhaps, through the long passage of history, whales themselves would have played an even greater role in the human imagination. Already magnificent in size and grace, their presence multiplied across the centuries, they would come to embody the endurance and resilience of wild nature itself, not as fragile survivors, but as undisputed lords of the sea. In the absence of whaling, the seas would sound different too. Whale songs would not be echoes of thinning populations, but thundering choruses, complex and evolving. Scientists of the 20th and 21st centuries would study these uninterrupted cultural transmissions, unlocking secrets about animal societies, memory, and group knowledge. Entire branches of marine biology might be more advanced, as stable populations allow for the study of rare behaviors and genetic diversity. Conservation scientists, instead of focusing on restoration, would be tasked with preservation and appreciation, learning from an ocean that still operates close to its ancient rhythms. Of course, humanity's other interactions with the marine world would fill the void. Fishing might become even more intensive, as the absence of whale products drives increasing demand for other oceanic resources. If anything, industrial fishing might expand sooner, unchecked by the legacy of whale-focused industry. The environmental impacts would shift, but not disappear. While whales benefit, other creatures might bear a heavier burden. Looking at the social and political landscape, nation-states would find other flashpoints for maritime disputes. Whaling in the 19th and early 20th centuries triggered several international incidents, from clashes in the Antarctic to legal wrangling over territorial waters. Without these, diplomatic energies might be focused elsewhere, perhaps on fisheries or mineral rights, shifting the birthplaces of international environmental law. If we extend this alternative history to the modern day, certain cultural flashpoints simply never occur. The outcry against the International Whaling Commission's slow action, the Save the Whales movement, the confrontation between environmental activists and whaling fleets, all erased. Greenpeace and similar organizations might have formed around entirely different issues, like ocean plastic or deforestation. The shared global trauma of nearly wiping out the largest animals on Earth would not unify or galvanize so many people. Environmentalism, perhaps, would be less emotionally intense, its banner animals held forth as benchmarks of success and abundance, not warnings of loss. The absence of whaling devastates some traditions while preserving others. For indigenous cultures with sustainable whaling, their customs would have deeper time and space to flourish, unchallenged by competition or the moral shadow of commercial slaughter. In contrast, cultures built largely on whaling's profits would find themselves reorganizing, their priorities forced elsewhere. Even today's dominant technologies could have shifted in subtle ways. The vast demand for lubricants and lamp oil provided incentives to innovate in chemistry and engineering. Without whale oil as a default, petroleum engineers and inventors might have pushed for earlier adoption of alternatives like electric lighting. The evolution of the electrical industry itself might accelerate, sparking new technologies decades earlier and shaping everything from urban design to global supply chains. Set against this is the intangible but powerful effect of guilt, tragedy, and rebirth that whaling's history brought to modern society. The tale of whaling, with its arc from exploration to exploitation to near extinction, followed by recovery and protection, is now a story that guides conservation efforts for many endangered species. It is a powerful cautionary tale. Without this, the urgency to protect other creatures might feel less acute. Returning to the whales, the oceans, and all life therein, the most poignant difference lies in what is never lost. The forests of kelp and the gardens of plankton more vibrantly alive, the ceaseless movements of great beasts across the world's basins, the multi-generational cultures of whale societies undisturbed. Their continued dominance in the food web provides oceans that are more resilient to disruption, more robust in the face of acidification, warming, and other man-made pressures. In this unbroken world, the deep connection between people and whales would hinge less on regret and more on respect and wonder. Thousands of generations of whales would sing their songs uninterrupted, each season echoing the music of ancestors, teaching the world that sometimes the greatest gift is to leave nature to its own ancient wisdom and to find our place not as masters or hunters, but as caretakers, witnesses, and fellow travelers across the blue planet's vast, unending sea.